Hello HA203. So welcome to our second video featuring items from NC State Special Collections. So in this video we're going to be talking about the different types of textile art that have emerged in American history. We're going to have a few examples. The first one is called Columbus Sighting America. It was designed and woven at the Arlington Mills in Lawrence, Massachusetts. So this is a woven reproduction of a painting that is held at the National Gallery at Berlin in Germany. The painting is by Hermann, Freihold Pludermann, who is a German history painter. He created it in 1836. However, this copy was made in 1892 at one of the largest mills in the country that produced cloth for both the world wars, if that gives you a sense of how important they were. This was at a time when the cotton and textile industry was at an all-time high. And for the 400th anniversary of Columbus discovering America, textile copies like this were made of celebratory paintings to be sold at this World Fair in Chicago. For context, the Chicago World Fair in 1893 was a celebration of the 400th anniversary of Columbus, quote-unquote, discovering the Americas. And at it, there were 46 countries represented, hosted on a large sea of temporary buildings and built environments. Some say upwards of 200 that were present for 6 months before being torn down. I would highly recommend Googling depictions of this World Fair. It was fantastic in its size and scale. So the way that this was created is actually a very interesting story, and then we will talk about the image itself. So the way that a textile copy of a painting is made, it was kind of a new idea. And so a photograph had to be made of an engraving that was based on the original painting. So there was the original painting, then an engraving like we talked about in the previous video, which is a copper print, and then a photograph was made of that engraving. Then there was a weaving design that was based on an enlarged version of that photograph. And using a system that is a bit too complicated to get into because I don't quite understand it, but through using that that woven design, they would punch holes in, like these tiny holes in the woven design, and then a machine would do the weaving, not humans. And so this machine was called the Jacquard engine. It was patented in 1804, and it used a series of hooks and levers, and it was manned by one man. And somehow those hooks and levers would correspond with the punched holes, and they would weave a replica. I would Google for more technical information on how this happened, because I don't want to give you misinformation on that. The loom, the Jacquard engine, was steam powered, and the making 2 of these took 1 hour and 15 minutes only. And actually what's interesting is that the Jacquard engine and the loom that it worked with were actually significant to the foundations of computing, because of their system of punched holes would later translate to the system of punched cards that early computing would use. Interesting tie-in. So now let's look at the image itself. So remember, the Chicago World Fair was celebrating the 400th anniversary of Columbus's arrival in the Americas. And so honestly, I would like to compare this to an image that we have looked at before, The Death of General Wolfe by Benjamin West. And so here we see our main figure standing here. Supposedly his gaze is looking upon the Americas, and we can assume this because we see others as well grasping for land, which they have missed over the past several months. We also see a man kneeling in prayer at the site of land, and we see a map which indicates that they are, in the right direction. They have reached their destination. While Wolfe, in his painting, was on the verge of death, Columbus is alive and well and has succeeded in his mission. However, the poses of the men surrounding them are very similar and suggest a similar type of Christ-like adoration. We have a man kissing his hem, similar to the symbol of kissing or washing the feet of Christ, or Christ washing others' feet. We have men exclaiming and tearing open their shirts as in excitement. We have a man even covering his eyes because he can't bear to look upon the glory that is Columbus. And we have a man slumped on Columbus's shoulder, overwhelmed with emotion. This can be compared to the figures surrounding Wolfe, where there was also a man whose hands were clasped in prayer. Men who were looking contemplated, who were throwing out their arms in shock at what was happening. However, whereas Wolfe was slumped in an elegant and graceful, yet obviously weakened state, Columbus stands here proud. This is a sign of his achievement. Additionally, while the banner in the skies and the action behind Wolfe is all very dark, and there's not a lot of wind, showing that, it is a saddened scene. Here we see a bright sky behind. We see sails that are full of wind. We can see via the curves and the depth that we see in the color gradation, showing that the sails are full. And the fact that they have reached land and not everyone is scrambling means that it is a fair day, assuming that this is a preordained and God-driven mission. So we can see how this image would work well with the celebration that was going on at the World Fair, showing the discovery of the Americas and then all of the cross-cultural interaction that occurred since then. Hello, HA203. So welcome to our second item of our second video. This is perhaps my favorite item that we will be looking at today. This is a book called Aunt Sally's Lament, and we can see it is going to be telling us the story of a quilt and a quilter. And I just wanted to point it out real quick that this came with a custom box, and we can see how even the framing of this item tells us an indication of what it holds inside. It's beautiful. So this is a very unique piece. It is both a poem, a representation of an art form, and a piece of art in itself. The poem is by artist Margaret Kaufman. The book was designed by Claire Van Villette, and it was based on the work by Heidi Kyle, who was a book conservator in the 70s, who is known for her unusual take on understanding the architecture of books. So the poem is woven into this recreation of a diamond pattern. So what is a diamond pattern? This is one of the basic patterns that American quilt makers have historically used, and you can make it as simple or as complicated as you want, depending on how small or large of pieces you use and how intricate your stitching and designs are. So quilt making in America has a very regionalized history because there's not really a way to sum up trends nationwide, because every quilter, every family does this craft differently, and it's used for different things. Some use it as a way to record family history. Some use it as a functional piece. Some quilt makers rose to acclaim and sold their pieces commercially. Some recorded historical events. There's one if you go to Colonial Williamsburg, I went to William & Mary, so I spent a lot of time in Colonial Williamsburg. They have a quilt exhibit in their museum, and you can see they actually got famous people from, I believe it was old Hollywood and the expansion to the West generally, and I think we have one from like Billy the Kid, and they would stitch their signatures into the quilt. So it really could be, quilts could be a record of anything. But they are this interesting combination of both an artistic piece and a functional object. And so just like the pre-Columbian pottery that we looked at, they are classified as art by some, but not by all. Quilts were also made historically by women, and there were many subtle ways to show the skill of the quilter. So let's dive into this. So the poem itself, and I will show you a little bit of it, it is an autobiographical poem about a quilter who we don't know the name of and who didn't actually exist. This is a fictional character, and there is no real setting to this poem. This is in a fictionalized generic Americana, where women sat on porches and quilted, and transient men came and went with their wares. So as we start out, we have the quilter, and she is asking, have I always lived here? Have I always stitched these quilts on my porch? And we see, as we will see further, the colors of this piece represent the mood on each page. At least I think so, which is really interesting. And we have both formalized musings, and then we have perhaps more regionalized expressions, full of a woman, my foot. Although this is not set in a specific place, it's meant to represent her character. So here we have, she turned 22 when a medicine man came to her town in May. May being a metaphor for spring, for young love. We have pastels representing that. A medicine man was a traveling doctor of debatable skill, debatable accreditation, but it comes from the term used for Native American shamans and healers, but it became commercialized, and it soon came to mean anyone who traveled with bottles and potions and wares meant to heal you. He was a tonic in himself. He sold things in bottles, and she was thirsty. They had a budding romance. We see darker colors, and we see the introduction of fabric into our diamond patterns. And here he gave her a taste of the world outside her gate. The colors are bright. And we see over here, oh Lord, yes, we see this pattern continuing in the square shape of the diamond pattern. Diamond patterns are squares, but they also can be divided as many ways as possible into small and small triangles. So diamond pattern can mean anything with squares and triangles. And we have the quilting frame spread out under the trees. Remember, this is an activity that was typically done at home or in domestic social circles. And so the spreading of the quilting under the tree is a metaphor for sexual relations. But we see the green, we see blossoms. So not only is the patterns relating to the story, but we also have the colors and patterns themselves relating to the action. And we have more of her telling of their relations, again, more naturalistic colors. And here we see continuing her sighs, her ponderings around the edges of the frame. When he left town, plain spoiled my taste for what I might have had. We see darker, moodier colors. We see dark greens and reds. She set aside that quilt, began another. So this is an interesting moment where we realize that the quilt, not just the book, but the quilt that the character is making is itself a historical record. So it's a record of her life, and the quilt that she is working on represents her state of mind. And never did she think that the quilt that she had been working on would unravel, and so she had to begin a new one. And here we have these dark tones. She was old before she'd finished being young. And when she describes her sister's wedding, we have pastels again. But at the bottom, we see my foot because they say, you're next, you'll get married. And she's saying, I don't know about that. And here, as we see the quilt come to its finish, she has made a complete pattern. So this is her in the present day, saying that her heart was wound into these quilts, more tears than stitches in them, and yet people dared call her quilts pretty. And here we see a finished product of how a diamond pattern can look. And so this whole story, not only is it telling how women, the settings in which they used to make their quilts and what people commented on them, but it also describes how quilts typically, I will crop this bit out, but how women would pour their artistic creation into these quilts, and how often their emotions, the happenings in their families, their own personal histories, all of these would be included in these objects. And so the debate continues, is this an art piece or a functional object? And so we can compare this book to Columbus's Discovering America, the weaving that we just looked at. And so one was for commercialization and quick reproduction, and it was mechanized. And one, we can talk about both the quilter hand stitching and having to unravel and redo her work, and then also this book, which is a limited edition. Let me find. Yes, it's a limited edition book, and only some reproductions of this were made. And so this is a very special gift. And so you can think also about the artist hand making these herself. And then also in Columbus Discovering America, we have the immortalizing of an image, of a person, and of a scene in history to its best possible light. Versus here, we have the telling of a story, of a sad story, of a person in decline through small details like these little sayings, through patterns, and through technique, rather than a finished product necessarily. So I hope you all enjoyed this, and as you look at future textile arts, perhaps not in this class but in others, that you will think about this conflict between function versus art. You will think about the labor that is put into them, and you will think about who is meant to view and use these items.